general welcome to IFA, to the International Federation of Airworthiness, and our webinar on advanced air mobility. Today's presenter, Yves Maury, and I have known each other for quite a long time. We have both worked in authorities and in the international organizations. Most recently, of course, EASA, European Aviation, or EU Aviation Safety Authority Agency, based in Cologne. But before that, both Yves and I worked as JA, the Joint Aviation Authorities, and our respective national authorities. So we both have struggled over lots of different technical issues over the years. And I've grown to appreciate his great wisdom and knowledge in very many areas of aviation regulation. So Yves is going to give us a presentation on advanced air mobility, a kind of introduction, and I hope that will open up a discussion. It is a vast subject. Please feel free to bring to this discussion whichever issues you may feel most strongly about. Let's say the focus mostly is on the regulatory developments. That's where our expertise lies. But clearly, it is a very dynamic subject. So please bring forward your questions. So I'll now take the opportunity to hand over to Yves. And Yves, if you would like to introduce, I've introduced you very briefly, but if you'd like to say a little bit more about yourself, and then forward with the presentation.
Thank you very much, John. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Yves Maury. As John has described, I have been working for the French CAA. Then I was in the Joint Aviation Authorities, and finally I spent 15 years in the EASA from its creation to my retirement, which was 2019. My last activities in EASA were about new technologies, so I was certainly very much involved in drones, and in particular in the drafting of the European regulation for drones that was adopted in 2019, and also in the eVTOL activity of EASA, not from a certification perspective, but more from a flight standard perspective, as I was in flight standard there. If I'm allowed to make a little anecdote, and taking the opportunity that Trevor is here, I remember having presented, it was probably in 2016, 15, 16, the first projects, which were Lilium and Volocopter. And I still remember the face of my colleagues around that were more or less thinking that I was simply dreaming. Well, I think I was, with hindsight, I was happy to have shown that earlier. As now John has said, it's quite an important activity. So without further ado, I will go into my presentation. Okay, to set the scene, I will try to present it briefly. I will give a very broad outline of a regulatory framework under development in, I would say, in several states. I will focus on EU airworthiness and environmental certification, and I will end up by a conclusion. Okay, first try to define what we are talking about. There are several definitions. I have tried to, I would say, develop one based on existing definitions from various places. So certainly, first we need to start by urban air mobility when we want to speak about advanced air mobility. Urban air mobility has a number of desired characteristics, like to be safe, secure, affordable, and also would transport passenger and cargo. It has to be enabled by new technologies, in particular electric propulsion, and it can be seen as an extension of the urban mobility, existing urban mobility in cities, but in the third dimension. It would include last mile deliveries by drone, and I would say operation intra-cities, and there are some ideas to do that, and between cities and suburbs, that is probably the most interesting case at this time, and between cities and airport. These operations can be piloted or not. Today they are mostly piloted, but there is a couple of exceptions to that. Then advanced mobility was in fact a generalization of this concept to intercity and regional air mobility. So you leave the city, you go to other cities, or you organize, I would say, regional mobility between different places. All this makes that we have quite a variety of airplane and aircraft range to do this. Some are happy with say 50 kilometers, and some others are looking for 300 kilometers or more. A related definition is the ecosystem, which I have mentioned here. Now it could be interesting to have a look at why is this being important. And here I'm taking material from EASA that is published on the EASA website. It starts, of course, by a remark that there will be 340 million people living in EU cities and therefore could experience UAM. What is expected is that this activity will grow, will provide jobs, which is certainly important. That EU will be one of the most important markets, but there may be others like the United States, like Australia, like China, like Singapore. So the EU will certainly play a role, but others will play a role. Of course, using air mobility could be safer than ground mobility, provided we have the right safety objectives. It will be hopefully faster, that's the main advantage, and also reducing congestion. And as most of the operation will use electric or hybrid electric propulsion, we expect that it will be environmentally friendly. And also, two key elements is that it needs to be integrated into, it has to, of course, be environmentally friendly. What are the conditions for these operations? Of course, safety and security. And security, certainly, as those machines, there will be a lot of links, a lot of communications. Security and prevention of hijacking is certainly a very important element. Noise and environmental impact are also key, in particular if you want to operate in cities. It has to be affordable if we want to have people using it. We have also to involve local authorities because they need to be comfortable that this is happening in their cities. It has to be integrated in the city and local transport network. So we should not see it in isolation, but in a certain context. And last but not least, and very important, will be the public acceptance. And already studies have been done which can show that there is positive reception at the time being by the public. The approach that has been taken by EASA, and which is probably a general approach everywhere, is that, of course, you need to start by airworthiness. We need to start by having safe aircraft and by certifying them, which will be certainly a key element in the whole exercise. They will need to be integrated into the airspace with commercial air transportation, general aviation, with drones. operation and pilot licensing will be important to look at. And again, societal acceptance needs to be, I would say, verified, which what EASA has done quite recently. We could add to this list, perhaps, the need for the ground infrastructure, that is to say, to have the necessary heliport or vertiport, as is the new name, that could be necessary to ensure such operations. To try to characterize such a wide activity is not an easy exercise. There is quite a lot of first of projects worldwide. The Vertical Flight Society, who keeps a directory about it, started with probably 200 aircraft 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Now we are at more than 500 projects. Of course, not all will come to fruition, but that give an idea of the interest. They can be organized into multi-rotors, that is only with rotors up to 18, like for the volocopter machines. 148. They could use vectored thrust, so that things where the thrust can be used for, can be moved, the thrust axis can be moved, either like a tilt rotor or like a tilt wing. 167, or a system where you have rotors for the lift and propellers for the cruise. So these aircraft would usually contain a certain number of people, I would say 4 or 5 to give an idea, but there are also ideas of hover bikes and personal flying device, which would be a single-seater, and there you have 86 of them. There is also electric rotorcraft, which are conversion of existing rotorcraft with electric engine, or more ambitious idea like the jaunt aircraft, which is in fact a sort of, it has wings, it has propeller, but it has also a big rotor. I want to mention a special case of flying cars or roadable aircraft. The words tend to be used indifferently in general. People say flying cars, say electric vehicles. I try to say, well, flying cars for me is a roadable aircraft, so it means that it's a machine which is intended to fly in the air, but also drive in the streets or in the road, which would mean that it has to comply with both road and air requirement, which may be quite challenging. Propulsion, as described here, could be using classical turbofans. We have some example of this. Pure electric with batteries, hybrid electric if you want to have a little bit more range, or fuel cell and hydrogen, which is probably the latest to come into the pictures. As the idea has moved from urban air mobility to advanced air mobility, we have moved from things which have to more or less do vertical takeoff and landing to short takeoff and landing, which is an interesting approach. Or in the today hype, it's called super stall to probably impress the customer. But the idea is short takeoff and landing. And that could, for example, use small general aviation airfield, which could have an interesting market. Finally, we could even have classical takeoff and landing, either conventional aircraft like the Cessna Caravan, or such aircraft, but with a modification to have electric propulsion. And they could even be with no pilot on board. There is research being done into that direction and experimentation. Well, today they will be piloted to give confidence to the public. And there are some exceptions, like the project developed by Wisk, which is a part of the Boeing constellation, which they have started ab initio with autonomous machine. Now, time scale. This is my own time scale. This is my own guess. You could say I've put some brackets to reflect the optimistic version, 2023. I'm more in favor of 2025. Early adopters, small volume of adoption, of course piloted, and most likely cargo or public services like air ambulances. 2028, 2030, we start to see more commercially viable activity, will still be mostly piloted operation, cargo and passengers. And then 2035, 2040, we approach certainly the maturity, the full activity, and then we could have autonomous operation as a reality. These are my, again, I stress my own views. I put them there in order to more or less fix some of the time scales, some of what we could expect. Now, what are the most significant projects? I have put some of them here using a picture that was nicely given to me by a consulting organization that has allowed me to use their data. It gives you an idea of the shapes of what we are looking at. The one I've reference as A is in fact lift plus cruise. This is the new Volocopter project. Volocopter has started with Volocity with a short range, 30, 50 kilometers. This one would have a bigger range thanks to its wing. B is the present Volocopter, which is one perhaps which could be one of the first to be certified. 18 rotors, so pure rotor but short range. C is the Lilium project, so a German project, but this one is vector thrust in the sense that the turbine, which you can see on the wing or on the foreplane, can be moved to vertical position for the vertical takeoff and landing. And D is an example of short takeoff and landing, so a lot of propellers, distributed propulsion along the wing. So these give you an idea of what the shapes people are and the configuration people are looking at. Now, what are the projects that have the most chance to succeed? I said 500 projects, not all will arrive. We have also to keep in mind that in order to certify, you need several hundred millions of euros. So you need to have also you need to have the necessary funding to do that. And so here there is this consulting body, SMG Consulting, which again has allowed me to use their data. They have developed a multi-criteria approach to look at the project. These are funding, the team, the expertise and the qualification of the team, the maturity of the technology, the progress to certification and the testing that is actually being done, how they substantiate their assumptions, and I would say the production, the fact that they are able to produce either themselves or by having partnership. So these are the main criteria. I could add two others, which are, for example, how much sales have been achieved, how much orders they have received, and what kind of partnership they have with, for example, well-established aviation company like Honeywell, General Electric, that kind of companies. So there are 20 of them in that list, and the top ones are Joby Aviation, Beta Technologies. They basically intend to do this one, Beta, to do medication, drugs delivery. Wisk, the autonomous one, Yihang, the Chinese one that was the first in place, which seems to progress a lot. And then you have a Volocopter in Europe. These are those that have probably the best ranking when you take into account all the criteria I was mentioning. When I talk now about funding, those which have been the most funded are Joby Aviation with $2 billion almost. Then you have Lilium, then you have Archer, Beta Technology, and Volocopter. So you can see that at least 3 of them are in the top, were in the top 5, and you can see that the funding can be seen as quite significant in terms of hundred millions of dollars. The total of funding today is 5.2 billion, if my calculation is accurate. Now the orders, they are quite spectacular. Of course, I have put here together everything, which is orders, firm options, you know, all the variations, but the great total could be 5,700 of them, which is quite significant if you think about it. So they will not be there, of course, in 2025, but they will come quickly. What are the top sellers at the time being? Vertical Aerospace in the UK, as you can see. Pipistrel, which could have a very big Chinese contract by the Chinese UPS, which is SF Express, and Yihong, which has quite a lot of also options announced. An interesting point are those which are mentioned in turquoise, which are in fact sales where hours have been sales, not the aircraft, but the use of hours, and they have been converted into a sort of an equivalent aircraft. So this can show to you that these activities at the time being has significant funding, aircraft which have a good chance to come to certification in a reasonable time scale, which is around 2025, and that sales have been, I would say, quite started very quickly and also very recently. They probably last year, those tables would have been probably with a zero everywhere, but in the last months of this year, there's been a huge development of the sales. Of course, sales again with all what it means in that context. So that gives you, I hope, a bit of an understanding of what we are talking about. Regulatory framework, how is it progressing? Well, in here I have put a lot of things, which mean the existence of, regulatory framework themselves, or roadmap, or CONOPS, or research activities, but things that show that there is an interest in countries. There are by alphabetical order, so no particular preference. So Australia has produced, I would say, it's quite active on drones already. They have produced, I would say, put quite a significant effort in defining emerging aviation technologies, in which you have UTM, unmanned aircraft traffic management, and urban air mobility. And they have consulted, they have a policy, and they have also an interesting issue paper, and you have the link here if you want to look at it. In Brazil, where you have Eve, which is a subsidiary of Embraer, they have started to develop the concept of operation in Rio de Janeiro with this subsidiary of Embraer that lead the work group. This activity started, I would say, a couple of weeks ago. In China, with the manufacturer Hehong, and the first to start, there is certainly a lot of work in China, not easy to identify what's happening exactly, but an indication of the effort being put in there is that a fundamental or a key political body, which is this General Office of the State Council, has issued to develop the policy, so political level policy effort to develop regulation, to develop urban air mobility as a priority. So this is an indication that in China, this can be a significant affair and a market. In the EU, we have, I would say, started to work on, I would say, the regulation or quasi-regulation with special conditions, which the special conditions were published with the very strong support of Trevor at that time. And the work to publish a special condition is good because you can start, but it's flexible, it helps for a lot of reasons. But there is also a need now to work on the operational matter, licensing matter, infrastructure matter, and EASA started to do that work. It has identified or organized the work with 3 categories of operation, which are not really regulatory, but more to help for putting in place the whole concept. I've presented them there. And the idea is to start with the VTOL operation in the cities with pilot on board and to have an NPA by next year in 2023. And of course, not only the eVTOL activity, but also the drone deliveries, which could also be a priority. So I've reflected that into two links where you can find more information on that. And I will come back to the special condition in a few minutes. We should not forget CESAR. CESAR is a body for ATM research in Europe. They have done a lot of work on unmanned air traffic management. We call it U-Space in Europe. The term was created by our former commissioner, Madame Bulch, a couple of years ago. And it's called U-Space in Europe. In the rest of the world, it's UTM, for unmanned aircraft traffic management. So CESAR started by work on air traffic control matters, mostly for drones, but with the arrival of UAM, they have extended, I would say, their work, and have now in their latest project incorporated the UAM aspect and are planning and are doing full-scale demonstration, large-scale demonstration with UAM aircraft, for example, in the Gulf of Finland. Estonia, Finland are active here, and they are using the EHang aircraft without passenger on board, but to do liaison, actual liaison, as if it was happening. Moving from Europe, or still in Europe, the Italian authority, INAC, has published a roadmap from 2021 to 2030 about air mobility. In Japan, they have set up an office for next generation aviation mobility planning office. Japan has UAM manufacturers and have been active in drones. And so they have put in place an office to develop regulation and issues surrounding aviation mobility. So here, investment in the authority so that they have the workforce to address the problem. Korea, South Korea, has published new urban air mobility roadmap that was last year. And they have an important manufacturer, which is Hyundai, which intend to put 1.8 billion into its own activities to develop aircraft. And very big interest of a car manufacturer is that they are very well aware of how to produce in quantity, but they're also working on UTM, not only on the aircraft aspect. So as logically, the South Korean government has followed by the development of a roadmap. Singapore, it should not be a surprise because Singapore is always a country which is very much engaged into novelties, and they are developing urban air mobility, working quite hard in UTM, having passed cooperation agreement with Volocopter in order to maybe have air mobility in 2023. The United Arab Emirates, which are also known to be quite open to innovation, novelty, have actually published a comprehensive regulation for UAM operation, mostly addressing operators actually, but including some element on airworthiness, maintenance, and flight crew licensing. It's published and you can access it that way. Of course, USA has been very active. FAA has developed a concept of operation. Their administrator has declared that they were considering that at the start of UAM for low volume operation, they were not seeing the need to develop specific regulation immediately. So I assume that they will work by exemptions, which is a solution. And of course, FAA cooperate with NASA, which has a significant research program, which I have listed here. And last but not least, UK, which has been very active in drone, very active in the development of the EU regulations before Brexit, has continued to be active in drone and UAM, and has published a future flight vision and roadmap for 2030, which include, I would say, eVTOL below 10 seats and light aircraft above 10 seats. And there is a lot of projects, notably on hydrogen propulsion by ZeroAvia in the United Kingdom. I have put here the roadmap, would you wish to consult it. So this is a number of countries which I think have certainly put resources in place. There may be others, and I would certainly be happy to complement if you had suggestions. These are a couple of slides, just a slide which is intended just to show the various test equipment put in place in the United States by NASA. So a number of wind tunnels, in particular for acoustics, the use of a simulator, I would say for example, simulating mission, that's a mission in New York, an Iron Bird to simulate something which would be powered lift and vectored lift, and finally flight test as they conducted recently with Joby to demonstrate or to have some idea of what would be the noise level. Now moving to certification, what we could expect is that Part 21 will apply in Europe. So Part 21 will, which address, I would say, airworthiness, environmental and operational suitability data. So the interface between certification and operation, which could be an interesting point into the context of UAM or advanced air mobility. An important thing also for the operator or the manufacturers will be the demonstration of capability. I would imagine that they will be asked to have a DOA. For example, Volocopter has already obtained a DOA. And the certification basis, of course, the usual principle in Part 21 of using special condition to complement existing cert spec. In this case, there is no certification specification, so mostly it's a business of generic special conditions. Related process, I will mention the production organization approval, which is an important one, which could be achieved either by buying, I would say, another manufacturer, which has been the case done by one of the two German UAM manufacturers, or by creating case of a Volocopter. So Part 21 basically will apply. What do we have in terms of special conditions? So we have published special conditions for eVTOL. It includes two categories, enhanced and basic. Enhanced means operating over congested areas, so urban areas. And enhanced would require 10 to the -9 for the catastrophic failures. This was based on calculation, based on an expected intense volume of operation above cities, and we cannot have the luxury of having 1 or 2 accidents per year in a city, certainly not at the beginning, and that would create difficulties. Means of compliance have been published, so this document, I would say, is fully usable and provide a lot of predictability. We have also produced, EASA, I still use the we, although I'm retired, but the we is still an habit, produced certification specification for electric hybrid propulsion system, for the whole propulsion system. And it has also been published. It's a good complement of the previous special condition I was mentioning. There is also, as an aside, a special condition for light UAS below 500 kilos, but with no person on board. Also of interest in terms of publication are the artificial intelligence roadmap published by EASA, and which also has published some first guidance material how to handle artificial intelligence, which plays certainly a key role into autonomy. So to have published generic special condition ensure predictability. I think that's a great advantage of that action. FAA, at the time being, as far as I understand, seems to work case by case, so directly with the various manufacturers, and to base its certification on FAR 23. This could perhaps create an issue. We will see. Maybe it's not a correct assumption, but this could create some perhaps discussion, as in fact in FAR 23, the level of safety of 10 to the -9 is only required for the commuter. So it will depend on how FAA will interpret, in fact, CS23 and its level of safety. They have used CS23 because, or CS23, FAR 23, because like CS23, it was revised a couple of years ago in order to be written in a performance-based manner, which of course helps a lot for this kind of new project. And I should have said that it's also true for the special condition on eVTOL. It's written in a very performance-based manner, and in fact, we don't find the usual paragraphs numbering. We have a paragraph numbering, but it's a 2000 range numbering than the usual numbering we had in the existing years, just to show that there is a difference of approach between new kind of CS. A couple of points which is certification. I will not go the 40s of them. They are based, in fact, on a list that EASA used at the end of 2019 during the Rotorcraft Forum to present a couple of issues. I've highlighted a couple of them, like, okay, the need to define certified minimum performance. In classical aircraft, it's simple, one engine out. Here, what do you do when you have 18 engine and rotor? So you need to define what could be the certified minimum performance, so what is the kind of failure you will take into account, and what will be also the critical failure for performance. Crashworthiness is also important, as like in any project. Also, a key point will be what is energy reserve. What do we take into account for the reserve, for example, of the batteries? We need to have reserve in order not to deteriorate the battery, not to go, for example, below 10% of the battery capacity, but also you need to take into account that your vertiport or heliport may be occupied, or there may be an accident, or it may be bad weather, and you will need to divert. So you need to add or take into account the possibility for a diversion. And this can be quite significant. In a paper that Lilium produced, they calculated that they needed to have 900 kilos of batteries, they are purely electric, in order to have a range of 261 kilometers. But when they introduced the reserves, they saw the important nation that ensure also safety, but that I wanted to highlight is cybersecurity, because of the numerous connection between the machine and control centers. Cybersecurity is a fundamental issue that will need to be addressed, because hackers could see, I would say, an unmanned and urban air mobility system as a very interesting target, and not even speaking of terrorism. Other related issue, public acceptance. EASA has conducted a study in 6 European cities, which show that the majority of people that were consulted were positive, provided, of course, they're concerned on safety, security, and environmental issues will be addressed. Environmental issues are noise, also wildlife. A bit to my surprise, some people were concerned of the effect of UAM on wildlife, and also that may be a bit more far-fetched, or when the system will be fully developed, visual pollution. Ground infrastructure should be certainly stressed, because there is a need to have those vertiports. They take space in a city. They may be not so easy to define, because you will need to have obstacle clearance surfaces, so you need to protect against the obstacle. So the definition of the engine failure to be taken into account is fundamental there, but there are other criteria like fire safety, how do you change the batteries or charge the batteries. Pilot qualification is also an interesting concept, because what is expected that even if there is a pilot, probably also to reassure the people on board, this will not be perhaps a standard pilot as we know today. There are concepts that are being developed as simplified vehicle operations. It was developed by the GAMA, which is in fact the idea of trying to identify what is better done by a system, what is better done by a pilot. So by using that, by using in fact your actual configuration and using this method, you could define exactly what you need from the pilot in your aircraft. It could be a very good approach, perhaps rather than the classical approach that is used in flight crew qualification. operation, of course, need to be looked at, again with the case of reserves, but also the case of weather, in particular in urban area where you could have wind vortices created by building. Last but not least, maintenance. I would say, as a broad idea, maintenance requirement should be used at the time being. They are generic enough. However, there is perhaps a need for the certifying staff to look at the qualification for maybe electric propulsion. Electricity is not new, electric motors is not new, batteries is not new, but electric propulsion is perhaps as a whole a new concept that would need perhaps to be introduced in the qualification of those people. Okay, as a conclusion, I've tried to present what is AAM, Advanced Air Mobility, try to show what's happening worldwide with regulation and related activity, and provided a little bit of focus on certification and notably EASA certification. So as perhaps an opening for discussion, and it's clear that challenges do exist. We are not yet there. There are work to do, and start for me is around 2025. But in my view, this is certainly something which is quite promising. Why? Because first, funding is available. It didn't stop due to COVID-19. We could have expected that investors would suddenly get cold feet. Not really, apparently. Governments seem supportive. There is activities in research, in regulations, in roadmaps, so governments are supportive. We are seeing the first certification, progress is made in Europe, but also in the United States. Apparently, significant sales and orders have been achieved, and this from classical aviation. It's interesting to see that major airlines in the US have actually bought those machines because they probably see them as a complement to their normal operation, but also companies like Bristow have bought, I would say, for example, aircraft from Vertical Aerospace. And it's an interesting to see that an helicopter company could see a change to its operation, not using helicopters, but using eVTOLs. Public perception seems positive, so there is no showstopper there at the time being, provided we ensure safety, security, and environment. That needs to be stressed. Limited CO2 footprint, that is certainly in line with all the ideas of combating climate change. And it opens, I would say, new possibilities of air operation in areas where there were not such operations. I'm aware that there were the very light jets in the year 2000, that the intended 1,000 of aircraft didn't came. I'm aware that there was also the failure of the .com, where there was a lot of funding put into IT companies in the 2000, and that failed to materialize. But here, I think we could have tangible arguments to say there is a real prospect here. So thank you for very much for your attention. Sorry, John, I've been a bit longer than I thought. But
I thought you might have a lot to say, actually, Yves, yes.
I hope I've not eaten all the time for the debate, and certainly questions and comments are welcome. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Yves. I think that's a very good round robin of the whole subject matter, and does raise a lot of questions in terms of where we're going. I agree with you. I think it is something that is going to find its way into everyday life in the future. So we need to make the right preparations. We've got a couple of questions that came up on the chat. Steve, you from Australia, what question would you like to ask?
Well, I would look. Thanks very much, Yves, and look, it's great to hear about these new developments. I really appreciate your presentation tonight. Tonight, my time. Thanks very much. I was just wondering, Yves, is AAM an opportunity to review our airworthiness regulations for the generality in the way that they specify the performance objectives, so that they can be more independent of technology and purpose to cover AAM, rather than having to sort of develop new categories?
Steve, for your question, I think the answer could be, or should be, yes. In fact, this exercise has already started to be more, I would say, objective based on certification specification. It started a couple of years ago on CS certification specification 23 and part 23, which have been rewritten to be more, I would say, performance based. The drone regulation has also been written in terms of performance based. And I would suggest, yes, it would be a good idea to take this experience and to convert the existing CS into more performance-based CS. The exercise may not be always easy to do because it's not just as some were thinking at the beginning when we started on CS23 to cut and paste, I would say, to look at what was CS, what was acceptable means of compliance, and make some cut at the right level. You need some time to rethink and find what was the actual objective and rewrite it in order to make it work. But
absolutely, yes.
If time permits, it will be in the fullness of time. It would be an excellent idea to do that and to do it to other certification specifications. Thank you.
That's an interesting one because it means the impact of advanced mobility may affect what we might call classical or conventional aviation in the fullness of time. The discoveries and the innovations that arise through these projects may actually shape the development of future large aircraft as well. So that's a fascinating possibility. Yves, you mentioned showstoppers. I mean, what's the single biggest showstopper that you've come across so far in terms of difficulty of certifying or proving something to be safe in these proposals?
Okay, one of the showstopper which we could mention is probably demonstrating the 10 to the minus 9. That is probably quite a steep requirement. I'm not anymore in activity, so I don't have any particular information on it. I would guess that that's probably one element that the manufacturers will have to take into account seriously and make the right demonstration. So this could be quite an effort to comply with that should not be underestimated, in particular in small machine like this one. Another one, which there is probably more a matter of effort to be put in at the right time, is to obtain the DOA and the POA, which are the design and manufacturing approval. It's not rocket science, but it deserves a number of effort and rigor in order to put in place the necessary elements in place.
Yves, we've got Trevor here. Let's ask him that question related to the 10 to the minus 9 objective. Is it too severe, Trevor? What's your view? Is it too severe?
So. Well, before I say anything, Yves, it's really fantastic to see you and hear you. And that was a really great overview and really fascinating perspective on the whole situation of technology, what's going on. So thanks very much for that. I know it takes a lot of effort to put something like that together. So thank you. Of course, I was at EASA, so were you, Yves, at the time that we discussed what should be the target. And the objective of the investors was to have thousands of these aircraft operating in cities. Now, if you think of accidents like the Battersea helicopter accident and one or two others in cities, it causes huge public outcry. And so I think, you know, when you've got a helicopter that's certificated to 10 to the minus 9 crashing in cities and the public not accepting that, I think it's difficult to argue you should have a lower level of safety. Now, it's simple arithmetic. If you've got thousands of aircraft operating each day, maybe three or four flights a day, or 5, maybe 10, you can soon work out that if you don't aim for that level, you'll be having many accidents, fatal accidents each week, in fact. And, you know, you need to go down by a couple of orders of magnitude in practice, take account of the operational issues and the fact you have many systems on board that you design each one for 10⁻⁹. So I think it's for me, we have to do it. It will be interesting to see the difference between the US and the EU on this issue, because I think, well, Yves, you mentioned FAA are aiming for commuter category 10⁻⁹. I think that means that something like 4-seat urban air mobility aircraft would not need to comply with that. I think once you've got a few thousand aircraft operating, we'll soon see a lot of accidents with those if they don't up the game. That's my view. So
no, thank you, Trevor. I don't think anyone knows the answer in particular, but it is interesting to see. That's going to be a challenge for a lot of the new entrants to the marketplace, you know, and there are clearly here a lot of new people coming on board. And a lot of use of standards other than aviation standards. I mean, Yves, what's your view of using automotive standards? We're talking about a performance base, so I suppose that can be accommodated. What do you think, Yves?
Well, that could be,
You've got
course,
your mute on at the moment. There we go.
I'm back. There is no, to me, there is nothing against doing it. Of course, what will be needed is that for the person that want to use it, is that those automotive standards comply with the specification in the fullness of time. I would not see a showstopper there to use automotive requirements. Only perhaps there will be an increased burden of proof, I would say, on the applicant to obtain the agreement of the authority.
Okay, we're coming up to our hour, but I'm quite happy if everyone is to overrun a bit. Are there questions from anyone else in the audience that you would like to raise with Yves at this time? Okay. Nothing.
Oh, Yves, if I may, please, John.
Steve, by all means.
Yes. Look, and this is a question for Trevor as well, if you've been in these sorts of discussions. I'm just wondering, is there any thinking that as these become more commonplace and mundane, that there might be an increased tolerance amongst the public for accidents as we accept for automobiles?
Yeah, if you have an answer, please.
No, I don't have an answer. I was going to say it's a good question. We have not, I would say, we have not taken that into account in the thinking as up to now. I would say we said, okay, we look at aviation. We know that when something falls from the air, it's always and even the general aviation aircraft, it's always it makes the headlines. So we have not taken that into account. Frankly, I don't know, but it's certainly a very interesting question.
Well, I've noticed, for example, Yves, that there's different safety cultures in different countries, as you know, and I've noticed that in Australia, a general aviation accident gets a lot of attention, but not nearly the same in the USA.
Would anyone like to reply? I think I agree with you, Steve. I think it is something that is dependent upon the culture of the nation to some extent. We're less tolerant in Europe. In the US, it is quite surprising because public liability is a big concern. So you would think that depending on who's killed in a particular accident, that might cause a lot of issues. Trevor?
Yeah, I think, if God had meant men to fly or women to fly, he would have given them wings. And so people have a natural fear of flying. And the thought of falling through the sky or in fire and all those things, and walking down the street and having one of these things fall out the sky on a bus stop or something, I think if these kind of accidents happen, I don't think they will ever be accepted. I don't think, well, yeah, every week, you know, I see one of these fall out the sky, so it's fine. You know, I don't think that will help.
It'd be a very
Yeah.
bad science fiction movie, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's a dystopia. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, you know, if you look at aviation, people have only expected higher and higher and higher safety levels for large transport airplanes. You know, we've achieved 1 in 10 million departures, which is amazing, and we have to achieve the same. I think we have to aim for that level for urban air mobility and for the future. We can only aim for higher standards. There's no excuse to aim for lower standards. But I think just to one other thought to finish on, which Yves mentioned, the environment. I think the importance of the environment is overtaking the importance of air safety. And there may be a balance to play there, you know, because we can probably save more lives through climate change, preventing climate change, than we can through air safety. Just a thought.
I think it's a good thought in terms of the greening of aviation. Advanced air mobility can add a lot to the greening of aviation. Yves, I'm very, very grateful for you to put this together. As has been said, we all know how much effort is required to do this, and it's wonderful to have you provide us with such a glorious overview of the subject matter. Is there a closing remark you would like to make? You're on mute at the moment.
Okay, thank you. No, thank you for your kind words. I was certainly happy to prepare such a presentation, because I must say I'm following all those developments. So putting it together was an interesting exercise. So thank you for having given me that possibility. Perhaps my only remark, closing remark, would be on the public acceptance. We have discussed it during this presentation, but it's certainly, and during the discussion, but it's certainly to me a very key issue. And Trevor is right in saying that if we would have, God forbid, a crash in the just after the start of operation, that could be really could be a real showstopper. That's so we need to be very careful and to address the concern of the public in terms of safety, in terms of security, and in terms of environment. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Yves. Thank you again for putting the presentation together and giving such a good survey of the subject matter. I agree with you. I think, yes, there's all sorts of questions in terms of public acceptability, and the work we've done over the years has, we hope, made it safe for people to fly and for people to have confidence in flying. And we would wish, I think, to see that advanced air mobility is a safe system, becomes a safe system. So thank you all for coming on board today. I think, you know, it's always good to visit these subjects. The material itself will be available on the IFA website, so it'll get another life. I'm sure that Yves, myself, Trevor, maybe Steve would be happy to answer questions if you have any further questions that you would like to forward to us, maybe through the office, through Linda. IFA will continue, I think, to take a strong interest in these new aviation developments. Our future is a very fascinating one. As I say, it's a time when aviation is almost as it was, it's in its infancy. There is such a experimentation and innovation going on that it's a very exciting time to be involved in airworthiness. So thank you all. A special thank you to Yves.
Thanks, Yves. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.